Hello, everybody. I am Sarah Michel, and this is another weekly challenge to God. To all of those who are not familiar, this is a challenge I do about every week or so. Actually, my last one is about 3 weeks ago. I've been very busy recently. That's why I haven't been done this very often. This is something that I do as an experiment to test if God can provide any evidence, any objective, verifiable evidence that He exists. I do these live streams as a challenge to God to demand Him that if He exists and if He's capable of revealing Himself to people, that He should be able to reveal himself in front of a camera in a live stream so the whole world can see that he is real. That is why I do this. It's to challenge God, if he exists, to provide us with this evidence, because most of us atheists don't believe such God, interventionist God, exists because we never saw evidence for him. So it's a simple challenge. If God is real, if God is capable of providing, of interacting with matter and providing and revealing himself, he should be able to reveal himself in front of a camera and we all can see it. Anyway, let's do it. As the experiment is running, by the end of the video, let's see if God is going to show up. I am going to talk about something not so much related to the God question in this stream. I'm answering a question by Aries Four, who wanted me to talk about the hard problem of consciousness. I thought it was a beautiful question, a great question. I really like philosophy of mind. I like neuroscience. So, of course, this is something that I felt very, I was really curious about. I was really interested about answering this question. I didn't put it in my Q&A video. I decided to do a whole stream on the topic. So for those who are unfamiliar, I'm just going to give a quickly explanation of the hard problem of consciousness. So it's proposed by philosopher David Chalmers that there are simple and simple problems of consciousness which are related to how the brain works, the mechanisms of the brain that science can explain. But he believes that science is not capable, neurobiology is not capable of explaining the so-called heart problem, which is why there is such an inner life inside our minds. Why do we have such a, not exactly why we have such a subjective experience, but how is our mind capable of, our brains capable of creating such an immense universe inside our own heads that is not accessible to everybody, that is completely subjective to us? Now, there are a few ways that people try to address this problem, and I will put, I didn't put in the description yet, but I will put a link in the description of Chalmers himself explaining the process. There was a very good talk that he did in a website explaining what the hard problem of consciousness is according to him. And yeah, it is an interesting idea of trying to address this issue of why is our experience subjective, and why is it possible, is it ever possible that other people can access that very subjective experience that we had? I thought I had a thought experiment once of imagining a world where we could put all our minds in one single network where all of experience could be shared. And if that would allow us to experience what other people do, because, for example, if we create a model of the mind, if we scan people's brains, we can have an access to all those physical things that are going on in their brains, but we still don't have an access to their subjective experience. And that is an interesting question. That is a very interesting question that is proposed by the hard problem of consciousness. We cannot really understand how that person feels. And if we could, let's say, put all us together in one single network, would that mean that we could experience how the other people feel? How would we do that? The problem of doing that is that for that to work, you would have to have a microchip in every person's brain that would interpret all of those physical signs, turn it into an algorithm that will send to another person a microchip in the other person's brain that will deconvert those algorithms and put it in their brain as sensorial input. The problem, of course, is that each individual brain is unique. We have different neural networks that are not exactly the same, and structurally, every brain is rather unique. So even though the inputs might be the same, the structure of the brain, the neural networks are not the same. And of course, the experience is not going to exactly be the same. Besides, when you translate that sensorial experience into algorithms, maybe something is going to be lost there. We cannot know for sure that it is exactly the same. And that is an interesting question for philosophy of mind, because if something is lost, wouldn't that imply that there is a sort of non-physical element there of a mind that we cannot translate into an algorithm, that we cannot reduce to simple a mechanistic process or a mechanical process? And these are very interesting questions that are raised by the hard problem of consciousness. However, I do tend to agree with Daniel Dennett that rejects the hard problem of consciousness. He believes that the hard problem of consciousness can be addressed by simply looking at the simple problem of consciousness, which arise from the mechanical understanding of the brain, from neurobiology. I tend to agree because my perspective of the world, my worldview, is that of ontological mechanism. I believe that all of reality can be explained through mechanical processes. It's what really exists is matter, and not only matter, because there is other things such as antimatter, dark energy, that we cannot really explain yet. And most of the universe is made of dark energy and dark matter that we don't really know what it is, but we can detect it. They have a physical property, meaning that the way I understand reality, and that answers, by the way, the converted man's question about the nature of reality. For me, all that exists is simply mechanical processes going on. It's simply myself, for example. I am simply a combination, a very specific combination of fundamental particles that make me. And ultimately, neurobiology, in my opinion, is capable of explaining everything. But since the brain is unique, each brain is unique. There is no other brain like my brain. It would be impossible to translate that subjective experience to somebody else because of that unique structure of my brain that can be shared with anybody, unless someone would clone my brain. But even so, as neuroplasticity shows, that experience and your knowledge and how you acquire information also can change how your brain is. So even if you have a clone, that person's experience is going to alter the structure of the brain in very small things, but it will create different neural connections, and that is going to change how they perceive reality. But of course, this is because of how I perceive it. This is how I understand the world. As I said, I am an ontological I believe in ontological mechanism. That's how I perceive reality. That is my worldview. Some people will have different worldviews. And for them, and that is of course the case with Chalmers, and is the case with Jungians, they have different worldviews. They see the world differently. They might believe in some idealism that there are things that exist outside of purely matter. And I cannot say that they are wrong. I think it would be arrogant of me to say that they are wrong. But I do agree with Dennett that the hard problem of consciousness only becomes a real problem, only becomes a hard problem of consciousness. It only exists depending on how you see reality. If you see reality through mechanism process, the hard problem of consciousness doesn't exist at all. And in fact, consciousness as a phenomenon separate from the brain, is itself an illusion. It doesn't really exist. And another person that deals not exactly with the problem of consciousness, but deal with the problem of the self is Sam Harris. And he also believes that the ego, that the idea of self doesn't really exist as it is proposed by those who don't share the mechanist perception of reality. So it really boils down to how you perceive the world. If you perceive the world as simply as simply mechanical processes going on, as simply pure matter, of course, you are not going to understand the hard problem of consciousness, the same way that other philosophers do, or the other people do. So this boils down to that. This boils down to whether is consciousness real, whether there is a hard problem of consciousness, depending on how you see the world. For me, there isn't. But I do understand that there is a subjective element to consciousness. There is a subjective element to how we perceive reality, but that, in my opinion, can be explained by neurobiology, can be explained on the fact that each brain is unique. That the biology of my brain is not exactly of even a twin or a clone, because their experience is going to reshape their brains. So thank you, everybody on the chat. Thanks a lot for dropping by. I'll have a look if there is any questions. If you have any questions, please tag me. T Velocity SD, I think that's it. Are you going to get into solipsism and Boltzmann brains? I am not familiar with Boltzmann brains. I'm gonna have a look into it, but yeah, I can get into that in a different stream. I am gonna check it out. I really like this topic. Thank you for the tip. I'm gonna look into it, and I might do another stream about it in the future. Let's see if there is any other question. Remember Sammy Jenkins. What else is consciousness other than responding to the environment? Consciousness is related to the subjective construction and experience of reality, because as exactly as Brenda says, it is a representation, and it has a lot to do with symbols. We structure and we create all of our understanding of reality with symbols, with words and objects that are very subjective how we interpret them. And that is, of course, a difference that I believe us humans have to any other animal that we know of, because we have language and we have all the symbols, and the way we understand them might be very subjective. And of course, we're going to create this construction in our brains that is very much related to how we understand the symbols. And that is another problem when we're talking about translating that into an algorithm, for example, because how people understand these things is not exactly the same. So it is a very interesting topic. And of course, I might talk about this again in the future. If you guys are interested, you can put it down in the comment section down below. I'm about to end this stream now. Again, God didn't show up. No sign of God. So ending the experiment, God again failed to provide evidence that he is real. So, as always, again, thank you to everyone in the chat. Again, as always, I end this stream with the conclusion that God doesn't exist. I am Sarah Michel, and I thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Cheers.